May 1944. The blood-soaked slopes of Monte Cassino, Italy. A young German paratrooper huddled in his trench peered through his binoculars at the Allied lines. The battle had become a living hell, a meat grinder that had chewed up entire divisions for 4 agonizing months. The air was thick with the stench of cordite and death. But what he saw next made him wipe his eyes and stare again, convinced the relentless shelling had finally broken his mind. Through the smoke and chaos, he saw soldiers from the Polish II Corps hauling heavy crates of artillery ammunition up the treacherous mule-track path, and among them, moving with an impossible strength and purpose, was something that defied all logic, something that couldn't exist on a World War II battlefield. It was a bear, a massive Syrian brown bear, walking on its hind legs, carrying a 100-pound crate of artillery shells in its powerful arms as if it were a log. The German soldier lowered his binoculars, his mind reeling. He turned to his comrade, his voice a choked whisper. "I see a bear. It's carrying ammunition." His friend looked at him with pity, convinced he had gone mad. But down on the slopes, the impossible was happening. This was not a hallucination. This was Private Wojtek of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, of the Polish Anders Army. He was a fully enlisted soldier of the Allied forces, and he was helping his comrades win the war. The sight was so surreal, so utterly incomprehensible, that it short-circuited the German mind. They had been trained to fight men, tanks, and planes. They had calculated the mathematics of attrition, the physics of firepower, and the logistics of supply. But there was nothing in any German military textbook, no doctrine, no contingency plan that could account for a bear fighting for the other side. This is the story of how a nation that refused to die found its spirit embodied in an animal that refused to be just a pet. It is the story of the bear who became a soldier. To understand how a bear ended up on an Italian battlefield, you must first understand the men who adopted him. They were the soldiers of the Anders Army, a force forged from pure despair and indomitable will. They were Polish soldiers who, after their country was carved up by Germany and the Soviet Union in 1939, had been captured by the Soviets and sent to the frozen hell of the Siberian gulags. They endured starvation, disease, and brutal labor, watching their friends and family perish. They were men who had lost everything: their homes, their freedom, their country. Then, in 1941, after Germany invaded the Soviet Union, a strange twist of fate occurred. An amnesty was granted. These Polish survivors were released from the gulags and allowed to form an army under the command of General Władysław Anders. They were a ghost army, emerging from the depths of Siberia, marching south through Central Asia toward Persia, now Iran, to join the British. They were tens of thousands of emaciated soldiers, followed by even more women and children, a nation on the move, desperate to find a way to fight their way back home. It was here, in the spring of 1942, near the town of Hamadan, Iran, that their story intersects with another orphan of the war. A young Polish boy, a refugee, found a tiny, whimpering Syrian brown bear cub in the mountains. Its mother had been shot by hunters. The boy, barely able to feed himself, kept the cub in a sack. The Polish soldiers, seeing the boy and the cub, took pity on them. A young lieutenant, Anatol Tarnowecki, bought the cub from the boy in exchange for a few tins of food. The soldiers had nothing, but they couldn't leave the small creature to die. They named him Wojtek. In Polish, the name is a diminutive of Wojciech, a beautiful ancient name that means he who enjoys war, or more poetically, the smiling warrior. They had no idea how prophetic that name would become. The soldiers of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company adopted the cub. They fed him condensed milk from an old vodka bottle, then honey, jam, and fruit. In these hardened men who had seen the worst of humanity, the little bear reawakened something they thought they had lost: compassion, a reason to care. Wojtek had lost his mother, and the Polish soldiers had lost their motherland. In the desolate mountains of Persia, they found in each other a new family. He was no longer just a bear cub. He was one of them. He was a Pole. As Wojtek grew, his status evolved from that of a mascot to a fully fledged comrade. He lived with the soldiers, not in a cage, but among them, sleeping in their tents, often cuddling with them for warmth on cold nights. He absorbed their habits and mannerisms with an intelligence that constantly astonished them. He wasn't trained with treats and punishment. He learned by watching and mimicking his human family. His favorite reward was beer, which he would drink straight from the bottle, and it became his regular evening drink. He also developed a taste for cigarettes. He would not smoke them, but would take a lit cigarette, take one puff, and then swallow it whole. The soldiers found this endlessly amusing, a small moment of levity in the grim reality of their existence. He became a morale officer with fur. His wrestling matches were legendary. He would challenge the men, gently grappling with them, always knowing his own strength, never truly hurting anyone. A soldier who could wrestle a bear and walk away laughing felt invincible. When new recruits joined the company, they were often told their initiation rite was to wrestle Wojtek. His presence was a constant source of joy and a powerful symbol of their unique identity. He learned to salute when greeted by senior officers, a trick that both charmed and bewildered the military brass. He would ride in the passenger seat of their trucks, his head sticking out the window like a happy dog, his presence causing chaos and astonishment in every town and military base they passed through. The stories of his antics became the stuff of legend within the Polish army. There was the time a thief tried to break into an ammunition truck that Wojtek happened to be sleeping in. The resulting screams brought the entire camp running to find a terrified man trapped in the bear's powerful embrace. Wojtek had captured his first prisoner of war without a single shot fired. He wasn't a pet performing tricks. He was a brother-in-arms sharing their food, their quarters, and their journey. He was a constant physical reminder that even in the midst of a global conflict that had stripped them of their homes, they had managed to build a new family, one that was unconventional, absurd, and absolutely unbreakable. The 22nd Company and its bear were now inseparable, but their journey was leading them to the front lines, and a new challenge threatened to tear their strange family apart. By 1943, the Polish II Corps, including the 22nd Company, was ordered to move from the Middle East to join the fight in Italy. They were to be transported by a British ship from the port of Alexandria in Egypt. It was here they ran into a wall of military bureaucracy that was more rigid than any enemy defense. The British port commander, seeing the soldiers attempting to board with a several hundred-pound bear, was categorical. Regulations were clear. Absolutely no animals were allowed on a British transport vessel. For the soldiers, this was an unthinkable proposition. Leaving Wojtek behind was not an option. It would be like leaving a brother, a son, a part of their very soul. They argued, they pleaded, but the British officer would not budge. The rules were the rules. What do you do when regulations stand in the way of family? For the soldiers of the 22nd Company, the answer was simple. You don't break the rules, you change the reality. If no animals were allowed on board, then Wojtek would have to stop being an animal. They would make him a soldier. The Polish High Command was contacted. The officers of the 22nd Company made their case. This was not a pet. This was Private Wojtek, a morale booster, a comrade, and a member of their unit. In an act of bureaucratic genius that could only be born from desperation and love, the paperwork was processed. Wojtek the bear was officially enlisted into the Polish army. The mathematics of his induction were surreal. He was given the rank of Saragowi, or private. He was assigned his own paybook, which he couldn't spend, and a serial number. His name was added to the official roster of soldiers of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company. When the company lined up to board the transport ship, the British port commander once again tried to stop them. A Polish officer stepped forward holding a clipboard. He stated coolly, "This is not a bear, sir. This is Private Wojtek of the Polish Army." He presented the official roster. There, listed among the names of men like Jan and Stanisław, was Wojtek. The British officer, faced with official documentation from an allied army, was left speechless. He had no regulation to cover an enlisted bear. Defeated by logic he could not comprehend, he waved them through. Private Wojtek, a soldier in good standing, walked up the gangplank with his comrades on his way to fight the Nazis in Italy. The arrival in Italy brought the Polish forces face to face with their ultimate test, the Battle of Monte Cassino. This ancient monastery, perched atop a mountain, had become the linchpin of the German Gustav Line, a seemingly impenetrable defensive wall that had halted the Allied advance for months. The battle was a brutal, merciless affair. The terrain was hell on earth, steep, rocky, and exposed to constant, withering fire from German machine guns, mortars, and artillery. The only way to supply the forward artillery positions was a narrow, treacherous path that was too steep for vehicles. Every single round of ammunition, every crate of food had to be carried by hand up the slopes under a ceaseless rain of steel. The men of the 22nd Artillery Supply Company worked to the point of total exhaustion. They would carry the heavy crates, each containing 4 25-pounder shells and weighing over 100 pounds, up the mountain, their bodies screaming in protest while shells exploded around them. The losses were horrific. It was in this crucible of fire and exhaustion that Wojtek's story transformed from a heartwarming curiosity into an immortal legend. Confined to the base camp at first, Wojtek watched his brothers struggle. He saw them hauling the heavy crates, saw them stumbling with fatigue, heard their pained grunts. Then, one day, something extraordinary happened. As a truck was being unloaded, Wojtek approached it. He stood up on his hind legs, a posture the soldiers knew well from their wrestling matches, and extended his paws towards a crate of shells. The soldiers, initially confused, watched in stunned silence. It was as if he was asking to help. A soldier, half joking, half desperate, gestured for him to take a crate. Wojtek calmly took the 100-pound box into his arms, turned, and followed the soldiers up the path. He carried it all the way to the artillery battery, set it down gently, and returned for another, and another, and another. For the remainder of the battle, Wojtek worked tirelessly alongside his comrades. He never dropped a single crate. He never tired. He would simply carry the massive weight, his head held high, walking through the carnage as if he were immune to the fear that gripped the men around him. He became a surreal, inspiring sight on that mountain of death, a symbol of strength when the men had none left. The effect of Wojtek's actions on morale was electric. For the Polish soldiers, seeing their bear working alongside them was a profound affirmation of their bond. It was proof that their strange family was a real fighting unit. For other Allied soldiers, particularly the British, the sight was utterly unbelievable. Reports began filtering back from the front lines of a miracle bear carrying shells. At first, they were dismissed as combat fatigue, as hallucinations born from the stress of battle. But soon, too many soldiers, from too many different units, were reporting the same impossible thing. A British officer, visiting the Polish lines, is said to have asked General Anders what the meaning of the bear was. Anders is famously reported to have replied, "He is one of our best soldiers. He carries our ammunition and has never dropped a shell." The legend of Wojtek of the 22nd Company spread like wildfire. He was no longer just a mascot, he was a hero of Monte Cassino. His contribution was so significant, his legend so powerful, that after the battle was finally won, the Polish High Command bestowed upon him the ultimate honor. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company was granted permission to change its official unit emblem. The new emblem was the very image that had stunned the German paratroopers and inspired the Allies, a silhouette of a bear walking on its hind legs carrying a heavy artillery shell. This symbol was now painted on every vehicle, worn on every uniform. It was the official, undeniable validation of the impossible. The army was formally acknowledging that a bear had become one of its soldiers, one of its heroes. This act was more than just a cute gesture. It was a declaration. It was a statement to the world that the Polish spirit, the will of a people who had been beaten, imprisoned, and exiled, could not be broken. Their spirit was so strong it could animate a wild animal with a sense of duty and comradeship. The emblem became a symbol of pride for every Polish soldier who saw it. It was a private joke, a public honor, and a legend made manifest. The German war machine, built on rigid logic and industrial calculation, had been met on the battlefield by an army whose emblem was a fairy tale made real. They had faced an army whose spirit was so indomitable it could count a bear among its ranks. After the war, the victory was bittersweet for the soldiers of the 22nd Company. They had fought and bled their way across Italy, but they could not go home. Poland had been handed over to the Soviet sphere of influence. To return would mean imprisonment or death. They were heroes in exile, their country once again stolen from them. And what of Wojtek? He was a Polish soldier, and he would share the fate of his comrades. He was demobilized with the rest of the unit and sailed with them to their new home, a resettlement camp in Berwickshire, Scotland. He was a local celebrity, but his fighting days were over. As the soldiers began to build new lives, they realized they could no longer give him the freedom and care he deserved. In 1947, with heavy hearts, they made the difficult decision to gift him to the Edinburgh Zoo. It was a tearful farewell. For years after, his old Polish comrades would visit him. The effect was immediate and profound. Hearing the familiar Polish language, Wojtek would become animated, waving and responding to the men who had raised him. It was a poignant sight. Old soldiers, their hair now gray, standing before a zoo enclosure, speaking in their native tongue to a bear who remembered them, a living link to a time when they were all young warriors in a strange and terrible war. Private Wojtek lived out the rest of his days at the zoo, a beloved attraction and a living legend, until his death in 1963 at the age of 21. But his story did not end there. Wojtek became an immortal symbol, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between men and an animal in the worst of times, a symbol of the indomitable spirit of Poland. A statue of him now stands in Princes Street Gardens in Edinburgh, and another in Krakow, Poland. He is not remembered as a curiosity, but as a soldier. He represents the profound truth that in the dehumanizing chaos of war, acts of compassion and found family are not just a comfort, but a powerful act of defiance. The German soldier who saw him at Monte Cassino was not mad. He was a witness to one of history's most beautiful and surreal truths, that courage, loyalty, and the will to fight for one's family can be found in the most unexpected of hearts. Even the heart of a bear who became a smiling warrior, a hero, and a soldier. A private in the Polish army named Wojtek.